AGI, but, and this is important for today's conversation, there is also the risk of job distraction. This is probably one of the, less lethal, but quite severe manifestations of AI doomsday prophecies. The idea that machines will steal our jobs. And this is an idea that has been, around for centuries. You will be surprised. I won't go into the archaeology of this idea, but trust me, it dates back to the beginning of the 19th century. And it never actually materialized. To be frank, it never materialized at all. Nevertheless, there is always somebody coming up whenever a new technology is introduced or whenever a new technology is marketed, somebody coming up with wild estimates as to kind of job displacement that will take place usually in 20 to 50 years, enough for them not to be around when the other shoe will drop. But something that happened a few months after ChatGPT was launched. Remember, ChatGPT was launched in November 2022. A few months afterwards, 4 researchers of OpenAI and one researcher from a university, an American university, came up with this estimate of the impact in terms of exposure to LLMs in general. And they came up with this estimate according to which 80% of today's professions would be impacted by these technologies, to the extent that 50% of it, 90% of the workers would have at least 50% of their tasks replaced by automated processes. This is always the kind of trick that they try, the economists and other social scientists that try to come up with these estimates. They envision, construe jobs in terms of the tasks that compose the job. And this is something that happened actually not in 2023 when this paper was published, but in 2013 when another very important paper, which I think you are aware, some of us are more familiar than others with this, it's simply called the Oxford paper. Already here in Cambridge, this creates a sense of discomfort. But anyways, the Oxford Martins researchers, Carl Fry and Michael Osborne, came up with another estimate. This was way before ChatGPT, and they were basically talking about robotics and automated processes in the manufacturing sector. And according to their estimate, 47% of the jobs in the US would be destroyed by 2030. I would like to highlight that 2030 is a little more than 5 years. And unfortunately for them, but fortunately for the rest of us, this prophecy is way off. There's nothing like this. On the contrary, after the, let's say, crisis of COVID, let's say just because it was a temporary crisis, but it was the unemployment was reabsorbed, and we are now in a situation that is pretty much, globally speaking, comparable to the one that we had before 2019. Which basically means that employment, even if we talk about formal employment, has never been so high in terms of rate all over the world. This is, of course, for demographic reasons, for legal reasons, for policy reasons, and also for basically the fact that we are trying to create this kind of culture of employment, despite these wild estimates. Nevertheless, there is also a more structural, let's say, dynamics that prevents robots from stealing jobs. And this dynamics was probably best described in this 2019 article by MIT economist David Alter. And the title is "Why Are There Still So Many Jobs? The History and Future of Workplace Automation." The example that he described and analyzed in this article was actually that of ATM, automatic teller machines in banks, basically. And he analyzed historical data and discovered that not only the introduction of ATMs did not displace jobs, but there was a slight increase, at least in the US. Why? Well, because with ATMs, it becomes cheaper to open new bank offices. Thus, there was an increase in terms of new bank offices that were open, and this implies that new people were actually hired. Of course, their tasks changed, the nature of the jobs of bank or people who work for bank, not bankers, bankers doesn't work in bank. People who work in banks has changed because they are not there to count our money and hand it to us. They are more like counselors, advisors, confessors. They listen to you, what you want to do with your future, and they try to make you invest £2,000 in something stupid. Well, anyways, this is something that has to do with, on the one side, a change in the nature, but not in the quantity of some jobs. But importantly, it has also created what many refer to as an increase in consumer labor. Consumer labor is basically the unrecognized and unrewarded type of tasks that we do perform as consumer just to consume. Think about, I don't know, buying tickets at a station or online. Think about the self-checkouts. Think about IKEA. Think about the amount of work that we are supposed to perform just to have access to some services or goods today. This is something that I will not discuss here. There's a lot to be said, especially when it comes to digital manifestations of this kind of self-service approach to labor. But it is important to highlight that in today's automated-driven environment or ecosystem, there is always an increase in the amount of work that is given to consumers, but at the same time, there's a lot of work that is outsourced to other parts of the world where there is an available workforce. And this is something that can be seen if we look at the most recent examples of these self-service technologies. You are probably aware of the fact that there's been a lot of talk and also a lot of hype, and then this hype went down and crashed around robot factories that are not that robotic, because it turns out that robots demand a lot, request a lot of maintenance and a lot of programming and a lot of data, and people, by people I mean owners of these factories, usually buy the robots and they do not actually use them. So the job replacement does not take place because of this. In other cases, when it comes, for instance, to Amazon just walk out technology, which is a self-checkout push to the extreme. Basically, you go into a shop, you take something and just go out, and eventually, magically, automatically, you will be credited, or basically, you will not be credited. You will have to pay the amount of the exact goods and processes that you have bought. How does it happen? According to Amazon, this is, of course, AI. According to all the other people who discovered the truth, this is basically a few thousand people in India who have been performing by hand the work of recognizing the goods and processes that were bought by the customers. And this was revealed in the press a few months ago. So there is always something to be said about this kind of nexus between the self-service part of automation and the outsourced part of automation. Today we will focus on the second, on the latter, on the outsourced part of automation. And I would like to start and, go into the core of our conversation by showing you a little excerpt from one of the documentaries that the Wagner was so kind to mention. This is called Invisible Clickworkers, and this is the interview of a whistleblower that used to work for Apple, and his job was a bit sketchy. Okay, so kind of scary bit of video, I admit it. Importantly, there is a bit of a gap between what the persons we interviewed says at the beginning and what it actually boils down to. Because at the beginning he says there is no such thing as AI. Siri is not AI. Siri being the vocal assistant embedded in iPhones. But when he develops the argument, interestingly, we are in more familiar territory, because basically he says the way it was framed by our employers in court, where he was based doing this job, was basically improving AI. So something quite mundane. What's the, how do we explain this gap between what the employer, what Apple or the subcontractor of Apple says, you are improving AI, which is kind of reassuring and pretty much good. I mean, everybody wants better AI. And then what he discovers, not only in terms of espionage and in terms of snooping on people, because he was actually listening to live recordings of people speaking to Siri and dealing with it, analyzing it, but also listening to it. And the claim that this whistleblower has at the end, there is no AI. I hope, if I play my cards right, that by the end of this presentation, you will understand how to bridge this gap, and probably you will be, like him and myself, more on the side of there is no such thing as AI. To the extent that basically today's AI is predicated on the existence of huge masses of data. Data is what does today's AI. And despite the fact that whenever you speak to somebody who develops AI, their perspective is entirely different. Their perspective is, of course, on the parameters of the models or on the size of the model. And of course, in terms of size and in terms of number of parameters, this has been an explosive situation. GPT-4 or whatever, 4.5, where I don't know where they are anymore, allegedly has a trillion parameters, which is something that Uncle Max Scrooge in a Disney comic would use in terms of size and things. Anyways, this is important to take into account, but it is not that which makes the actual performance of an AI. An AI is just as good as the data it has in itself. And importantly, all the big breakthroughs in the field of today's AI, and by today's AI, basically, I mean machine learning, which is not the same thing. Anybody who has been studying a bit of the history of AI knows that the two things are not the same. But today, AI basically boils down to machine learning. Whenever we have had some major breakthroughs in machine learning, this has been preceded by the existence and the creation of huge databases. Of course, the actual size of the database changes over time. For instance, when in 1997, IBM Deep Blue was capable of beating at chess the world champion Garry Kasparov, this was prepared for several years by the creation of a huge database of 25 million games. It was called the Extended Book of Chess Game Datasets. Of course, it seems ridiculous when compared to the size of today's AI, but it was 1991. Then in 2011, when again an IBM solution called Watson won the television quiz Jeopardy. It was prepared 2 years before by the creation and, of course, the analysis of 8.6 million Wikipedia tables. So these were data that were available on Wikipedia. For instance, when Microsoft Microsoft AI was capable of beating a human doctor at image classification, especially not only on health data but also on other images. So this was prepared by 14 million annotated images on ImageNet, one of probably the most famous historic datasets. And let's quickly jump to 2020 when GPT-3 was introduced, and at the time OpenAI was still a non-profit, and they were more transparent than they are today. So at the time they were pretty clear about where they basically harvested those data. Those data were collected on a platform called Common Crawl, several petabytes of data that were scraped from the internet. And this is something that has to do with our first question. The first question is, so where is all this data? And when it comes to knowing where data are, some authors, for instance, insist on the fact that we should reply to this question by looking at where the datasets that are used today for machine learning are located. And they are located, well, basically, for the major part, in places like California or the East Coast of the US. A lot of them are here in England, but also in continental Europe, and a few of them are in places that are like China, Japan, Korea, but also India, and a few of them are also in South America. But the majority of them is concentrated around big institutions like companies and, of course, universities. So the usual suspects, we have Microsoft, Google, AT&T, Meta, but also, well, Microsoft today is basically merged with OpenAI. But of course, you do have Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, and Tsinghua and other universities. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but is it enough to know where are those data? If I were to look for the data, where are they located? Let's ask OpenAI again. Well, again, this is quite clear for them too, because basically they rely on Microsoft Azure solutions. So their data are, according to them, located only in the US, in those 5 states, and 6 actually, because there's also Washington, D.C. So again, this seems like a first word situation there in the US. And if we look at the data where the actual training sets are located. I told you that OpenAI relied on a platform that is available. It's actually an open platform called Common Crawl. It's not a secret. Common Crawl sports itself as the platform where the major LLMs of today are trained, right? And they are basically based in Virginia because they rely on Amazon Web Services. What do they store in these facilities? Well, basically they store the petabytes that they've been collecting for years. And they come from, of course, Wikipedia, Reddit conversations, or more or less shady online libraries like LibGen or others. And these basically constitute the big corpus on which ChatGPT is trained. But when it comes to ChatGPT, a lot is to be said about the fact that the very acronym GPT, there is the secret to the actual question, which is not where is the data located, but where does the data come from? Because GPT, just as a quick reminder, means generative pre-trained transformer. Transformer is the type of model. Generative is what the model does. It generates texts or images in some cases. And pre-trained, what does it mean? Well, it means that somebody had to take all this data and label them and train the model to recognize what the data are all about. If there is, I don't know, conversation in Russian about sport, somebody has to teach the model to recognize that the language is Russian and that the topic is sport, for instance. So, very simple example that basically helps us to ask the actual question and start seeing, putting faces on the persons who are the actual trainers. This, I mean, the cat was out of the bag. It quite immediately after the ChatGPT was launched. November 2022, ChatGPT was launched. January 2023, Time magazine came out with this expose, pretty damning, showing that basically the people who were training ChatGPT are a few hundred workers located in Nairobi, Kenya. Unfortunately for them, this is only the tip of the iceberg. With my research team, we have been organizing, we are still organizing actually, a series of conferences at the European Parliament where we bring workers that have been, among other things, training OpenAI models, and we bring them to talk about their working conditions, living experiences, and so on and so on. And they come from places like, well, of course, some of them come from they were working in Nairobi, but they were from Namibia, Nigeria, and other Ethiopia, other countries in Africa. But in other cases, they come from Venezuela, they come from Iran, they come from all over the world. But importantly, when it comes to the actual origins of the people who do the data work or training the data for the AI, well, even OpenAI has to surrender to the fact that they have to tell the origin of this data, like you would tell the origin, I don't know, of a fruit that you use in your ice cream or whatever. It's part of the ingredients of, let's say, this AI. So according to a paper that OpenAI published, the countries that are involved and the companies, the platforms that are involved to recruit and put to work these persons are located in countries like Kenya, South Africa, but also Turkey, but also some of them are in the UK or India, some of them are in the US, and a few of them are in the Philippines. So apart from the UK and of course the US, this country, the country where these data and these workers come from, tend to show us, or at least suggest, that there is another geography to all of this. And this is something that we have been working on, me and my fellows and colleagues, at our research initiative called DiPLab, which stands for Digital Platform Labor. Basically, this is our emblem. We have a logo, but then we have also an emblem. This is so French, which means basically that this is the symbol of what we do. We study what's under if AI is an iceberg, we are looking at the part that is under the surface. And under the surface, well, to understand what's under the surface, you have to go places. I like to say that what I do is I travel the world with my friends and solve mysteries. Let's continue. Basically, we have been interviewing and surveying thousands of people over the last 5 years, more than that, actually 7 years already, in several countries. Some of them, of course, are in Europe because it's closer to where we are located, but a lot of them are in Latin America and in Africa. We tend to focus, to specialize on interviewing people who come from French-speaking and Spanish-speaking countries. Other persons, especially our colleagues at the OII, Oxford Internet Institute, and our colleagues at the ILO in Geneva, specialized on English-speaking countries. Well, ILO in Geneva, they are more, let's say, more inclusive than we are. But basically, this is also to say that there are basically three initiatives, three teams of researchers that have been asking this question, and unfortunately we are all based in Europe. So again, there's a lot to be said also about the, let's say, disparities and inequalities in research. We will discuss it afterwards. Now let me focus on the things that we discover when we go places. So let's start with a country that we've been observing a lot, been a few times over there. It's Madagascar. You all know it from the animated movies, but apart from its splendid fauna and all the fun adventures over there, there's also a lot going on in places like Antananarivo, which is the capital. This is the happy hour. This is when the workday is over, around 5 or 6, and everybody rushes home. Where have they been working? Well, the people that we study work in places like, well, sometimes they don't need to rush home because they work from home. They are basically, they've created small or even micro businesses. In this case, it's where two brothers, two twin brothers of 19, 20 years, they have created in their room, in their bedroom, this, well, micro informal company, which is basically 2 computers and 5 people from the neighborhood that take turn to work day and night on a platform called Remote Task to train several types of AI. But in other cases, it's way more structured than this. You do have actual companies that are connected to platforms like Apple or Google, and they do this kind of work on a scale that is industrial. You actually have a production floor with hundreds of people in an open space. Each one is looking at a specific screen. In this case, they were looking at a solution that was a military solution that was basically capable of an AI that was capable of recognizing buildings, but also vehicles. Don't ask me where it was deployed, but it's not reassuring. In other cases, informality kicks in again. Some people were working in cyber cafes. A lot of countries still have a burgeoning ecosystem in terms of cyber cafe. This cyber cafe, of course, was called Baobab because Baobab is the national tree in Madagascar. And you have people, playing video games, and at the same time, you have people on the next screen doing micro tasks. And then you have this kind of typical situation. This was a house where we had like 120 persons, and everywhere in the garage, in the top floor, you had people working. Each room had 20 to 30 persons. Now, let me show you this image, which probably demands an explanation, but it's also to give you an idea of the fact that despite some of them nominally were able to earn a decent amount of money, because in some cases they were paid up to, well, the equivalent of 90 to 100 euros, the equivalent, per month. Which again is a good salary for Madagascar. It's twice the minimum wage. but it's not enough to live with a family in Tananarivo, which is an expensive town compared to the rest of the city. But importantly, a good chunk of their salaries, if they were paid in salaries, were paid as bonuses. And in some cases, the bonuses took the form of this. This is something that, it's a picture that I took in 2023 in one of those companies that basically had, for each level attained by the worker in terms of performance, a certain reward. Let's read it together, because you have to translate it, it's in French. First level, you have as a bonus 1 kilogram of sugar, or 2 small bags of salt. In other cases, you have beans, or you have sardines. If you are at this level, you have 5 kilograms of rice, or 25 kilograms of rice. In some cases, they pay for your electricity, and you do not see it, but at the top, there is actually written that they will pay for your rent. So again, it's a very disconcerting situation where some parts of formal labor are clearly present. There is also a big doubt about the fact that the laws that regulate this formal labor are all respected. And this brings us back to something, a platform that I think you are all familiar with because it's been around for 20 years already. It's called Amazon Mechanical Turk. It has nothing to do with Turkey, the country, but it has to do with this metaphor of the first AI that was ever introduced, allegedly, in the 18th century. This was actually a hoax. It was a fake robot disguised as an Ottoman Turk. This was a chess player. It was a robot that allegedly was capable of beating Napoleon and other big famous persons of the time, but it had a bit of a secret. Inside, instead of a microprocessor, it had a human being actually moving the pieces at chess. Who was this person? It's a mystery. Somebody say he was a soldier who had his legs amputated after being wounded at war. In other cases, the legend goes that it was a very skinny child that could actually hide. In other cases, Edgar Allan Poe, who was an incredible racist, used to say that it was a hunchback, an Italian hunchback of brown skin. He didn't like Italians or people who wrote. Anyway, so he has some problems. In many cases, why I tell this? Because in the history or the metaphor that was used by Jeff Bezos when he launched 20-some years ago this service is important to understand what today is the nature of the data work that is necessary to produce AI. Because in order to actually produce these AI solutions, these platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turk or the others that exist, they do not hire people who are highly specialized and highly paid experts in data analysis or data science. They basically try to recruit anybody. And they tend to describe them as unskilled. There's a lot to be said about the fact that they are actually skilled, but they are paid as they were actually unskilled because the level of reward still nowadays on platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turk is extremely low. In some cases, people are paid a few cents, luckily, quote unquote, to work only a few seconds or minutes. These are called microtasks. How many people are performing this kind of microtasks? Well, the estimate game is kind of difficult. We've been trying to do it a few years ago. Our colleagues at Oxford too. The World Bank tried to do it. But according to the 2023 estimate of the World Bank, the gap between the people who are the highly recognized and well-paid data scientists, of whom there are probably 28 29 million around the world, they pale to comparison, in comparison with the 435 million estimated workers on platforms such as Upwork, Appen, or Telus, or Amazon Mechanical Turk, and other, Remote Task, Scale AI, and so on and so on. There's a lot to be said about this estimate. Personally, I do not believe that we are at that level, because this would be 12% of the entire workforce of the world. But something that needs to be said is that the estimates have been going up for a few years already. Our colleagues in Oxford estimated in 2021 that the top number could be 163 million. Now we're talking about 435 million. The scale is enormous. And this is basically one way of saying that even if you don't believe that, because there are a lot of methodological problems with that kind of estimates, and actually one would say, okay, the data are problematic in itself, but it's important to understand that this is not a niche in the workforce. This is a huge phenomenon, something that we have been studying, and then I go towards the final part of my presentation, using a theoretical framework that basically allows us to analyze, as DiPLab researchers, basically the different types of work that are performed by data workers to produce AI. And basically, the framework is summarized by this image that gives away the process that is necessary in terms of putting human beings to work to produce AI models. First, you have to generate the data. You have to, for instance, take pictures of things or write down bits of texts. And these will, of course, stored in databases, but they need to be also annotated. So this is the data preparation phase. This is a moment where actually people start tagging your images or putting labels on your conversations. This is the AI preparation part. This is usually the only part that we as public opinion are aware of, because we think that once the AI is trained, it's done. ChatGPT was pre-trained and the training is over. Well, bad news. The training goes on, because once the AI solution is actually deployed in the wild, well, on the market basically, you need to evaluate the performance of the AI. You have to make sure that the AI does not produce something horrifying. For instance, I don't know, text generation, horrifying fake news or hate speech. These are problems that were extremely clear and present when ChatGPT, for instance, was first launched. Now they have been trying to work on them. How? Well, in some cases, they have been hiring people who have been validating the results of the replies to our prompts. In other cases, it's ourselves. We are doing this reinforcement learning, which basically consists in telling ChatGPT, no, you completely misunderstood what I was saying, what I was going for with my prompt. So it's the thumb up, thumb down feature that you have on ChatGPT. And then, of course, there is the final activity. That is something that is kind of hidden. This is the most shady and dodgy part of AI production. Is what is called, or at least we call, AI impersonation. Other colleagues call it with fancy names. Photonation, this is Astra Taylor, or our colleagues at ILO call it fake AI, or heteromation. This is Hamid Nekbia who came up with this idea. Heteromation is the opposite of automation, right? Basically, the idea, or all these let's say, definitions tend to suggest that this is an aberration. This is something that doesn't have to happen, because this basically is people trying to fake their way into AI, or companies that are basically fraudsters, crooks. Our position is slightly different. We don't want to justify them. We don't justify them, but we recognize that this is systemic. This is something that is not the bug. This is the system. Unfortunately, to produce AI, you have to fake AI. I will give you an example. I will give you actually 3 examples. One example for each one of these phases. AI preparation. Let's start with this. This is simple. This is kind of gross. I decided to choose this because usually at this time people are already tired of me speaking, and I want to, snap you up and have your attention. So this is taken from our fieldwork in Brazil in 2022-2023, and this was a person who was paid a few cents to take pictures of dog poop. Why? Well, be reassured, this was to prepare a specific type of AI. The AI that basically manages one of those Roomba robot vacuum cleaners. The vacuum cleaners that basically have to go all around your house, but also have to avoid obstacles like shoes, plants, bags, and dog excrement. Somebody has to teach the robot to avoid dog excrement. Somebody has to teach the robot what is dog excrement. How do you do it? You show the AI billions, well, not probably billions, but yeah, millions of examples of dog excrement. Somebody has to produce these images. Somebody is actually paid to do it. There are some perverse incentives that go into place pretty immediately because, that's just as much as a dog can produce in a day. So this person tended to go eventually to her neighbor's house to ask if she could take pictures of her dog's poop. Anyway, complicated, but I know that now you are awake and you are following me. This is interesting just not in terms of the actual content of the training, but of the supply chain, which is pretty straightforward. We have a company that produces this robot vacuum cleaner. The company is based in the US. The workers are based in Brazil. It's pretty much very simple, straightforward, south to north supply chain. Simple, right? Let's go back to the example of the vocal assistants. You remember the video that I showed you. This is another example taken from another interview. I've been working quite a lot on vocal assistants. Anyway, this person was actually working from home. She was a French worker. Working from home, she would receive snippets of conversation, short audio files, 5 to 15 minutes, seconds. She would have to listen and quickly decide if the transcript that the AI produced was accurate or not. The example here on the screen is the AI initially interpreted this snippet of conversation as the French phrase Ben Laden le mot alors, which translates as Bin Laden, the famous dead terrorist. The word then, it doesn't make sense, but I just translated literally. But why is Bin Laden there? Well, we're dealing with some, I don't know, terrorists or fans of dead terrorists or whatever. Anyway, so she had to listen to the conversation, and with her French trained ear, she would understand that the meaning is just "bah, donne-le-moi alors," which is a very common phrase in French, means just give it to me. Probably somebody asking for pass the salt or something like this. Something very anodyne, very mundane. Hopefully, you didn't have to call the police or the Secret Service. Good for the user. For the person, she has quite a hectic job, because he had to receive hundreds of these snippets and be quick and have this very sometimes solve very complicated situations in a very limited amount of time for very little money. But even more complicated is the supply chain in this case, because we have a company that is based in the US. It's actually Microsoft. She was working to train Cortana, which is another of those AI. So Microsoft subcontracted to a Chinese platform the solution of AI verification. And the Chinese platform subcontracted to a Japanese platform the recruitment of persons. The Japanese platform just had another subcontractor in Spain. The subcontractor in Spain recruited persons in France. The persons in France worked and trained the data and sent the data back to the US. It's a world tour to produce quite subpar AI. But just to show you that supply chains can get a bit complicated. Now let's talk about AI impersonation, just to give you this one very clear example. This is an example that we've been working on for quite a long time, and it's based on a participant observation that we did in 2022. At the time, a company was deploying smart cameras in supermarkets all over Europe. The company we became aware that because some of the smart cameras were deployed also in France. What is a smart camera? Well, it's actually a surveillance camera that is able not only to recognize the human shape and the fact that customers of the supermarkets are walking around, but also can interpret their behavior and spot the shoplifters and send an automatic text to the cashier or the security agents that would intercept the shoplifter and send them to jail. This is all automated. Let me show you the very complicated algorithm that goes into the production of this AI smart solution. It's 120 persons in Madagascar, in Antananarivo, living and working in a house day and night. They are between 25 and 35, well, usually under 30. The majority of them, they are highly educated persons, some of them with master degrees, a few of them with PhDs, working for basically for peanuts. And they were working in places like, for instance, the garage. Again, day and night. What they doing? They were watching live feeds from French supermarkets and recognizing, spotting shoplifters by hand, with their eyes, and sending fake automated text messages to the workers in those supermarkets. And they were pretty adamant about the fact that they were security agents working remotely for French supermarkets. But the problem is that the company has been selling for 5 years at the time this solution as an automated solution. And the flux of data and work goes actually like this. You have a French company and you have a Madagascan subcontractor, and basically the video data are sent from France to Madagascar, and then the annotated data go back to France. And this has been going on. Sorry, this animation is horrified, but basically it's a vicious circle that has been going on for 5 years, and they never actually developed an algorithmic solution. There is no way out. So we can agree with the whistleblower that was interviewed in our documentary that in this case there is no way out. But this is not an exception. Unfortunately, in many cases, you have to fake it. Well, not fake it until you make it. You have to fake it and just go on faking it. And in some cases, also, it's important to create this kind of impersonation situation because it's important to test the product, to test the solution, or to look for bugs in the solutions. These are the good cases, but in many other cases, there is no such thing as AI. So let's go to the final part of my presentation. What can we say about the geography of AI? And to what extent, basically, based on what I just presented, AI is an issue of global labor arbitrage. Basically, the fact of outsourcing to countries where the cost of labor is lower, which are in many cases low-income countries. Well, if we look at the geography of this data work production, based on the data that we have collected, that our colleagues in Oxford and our colleagues in Geneva, the ILO, have collected, basically we can say that, first of all, let's go back to where the data sets for machine learning are located. Remember the map that I showed you at the beginning is located in countries, again, that are in the global north. We probably should add countries like Russia today, and also, of course, China and India have become big players in the AI marketing side, meaning in producing things that are called or presented as AI and then delivering it to the market. But when it comes to the origin of the data, we basically have four flows, four fluxes. The first one is the Southeast Asian one. Basically, it starts in the Philippines, Indonesia, and then it goes through India, and it reaches the US. This is the first one that we, as researchers, as a community, have been documenting, especially our colleagues in Oxford have been working a lot on it. And we still have a lot of data and a lot of people who work on it for many good reasons. The second flux is actually the one that is internal to China. I didn't, touch on China for reasons that are basically due to the fact that I do not have data about it. Some colleagues of ours are now starting to work on China. And what we can say at this point is that there is a huge internal market in China and also a huge market in terms of Chinese-speaking communities in Southeast Asia. So it creates this kind of curve that starts somewhere around Singapore and then it goes through, rural parts of China towards Shenzhen and Shanghai. Then there is, of course, the South American flux. This is more complicated because it splits in two. Basically, it starts in places like Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and it basically coalesces around Venezuela. Venezuela is a big player in this data work market for reasons that, of course, are connected to the long-lasting political crisis and economic crisis. So we've been interviewing hundreds of people in Venezuela who were working from home, entire families put to work to earn a few cents, because in a country where you have 80% of people living under the poverty threshold, even earning a few cents can make the difference at the end of the day. And so some of them work for US companies, others work for companies that are located in Spanish-speaking countries in Europe, or more recently, working for Russian platforms. Again, we didn't talk about it. If you want in the Q&A, we can address it. And finally, we do have the African flow, which is actually threefold flow, because it starts in countries like Madagascar, but also Kenya, Nigeria, importantly Morocco, Egypt, and it goes in three directions. Some of this data and of this work is actually used to train AIs that are developed in and by European companies. In other cases, like in the case of OpenAI and ChatGPT, workers in Kenya were working for a US-based company, and in other cases, you do have people in places like Egypt working for Tencent in China to train face recognition algorithms, which creates a lot of problems, not only in terms of labor law, but also in terms of well, the fact that many of these workers are basically young, unmarried women in a Muslim country, working at watching persons doing whatever they do in China, and they do not have. They actually can, watch some kind of impressive or scary or problematic stuff. Just to quickly plug these two things, the book, you can download it illegally. I hope that my publisher is listening to me. Yes, this is a funny thing with the publishers, that they are so obsessed that people download it legally. You can also buy it legally. And if you are around on November the 12th, the network, and Minderu and DiPLab we are all organizing a workshop on November the 12th called In the Belly of AI. It will also feature a bit of a presentation of our documentary by the same name. And you will also have an open lecture with James Muldoon, who is the author of a recently published book called Feeding the Machine. So if you are around, register and show up. And I'm finished, and I think that I was too long, but hopefully that I touched on many things that we can discuss in the Q&A. Thank you very much.